You ever get that gut feeling something's off? Mine kicked in the moment I opened a letter from the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association that started with "Dear Resident" and ended with a voting notice I was supposedly already part of. My name's Randall Cole. I bought my house just outside the HOA boundary 6 years ago specifically to avoid the circus next door. Willow Ridge was known for its power tripping board and their queen bee, Glenda Barkley. Think bleach blonde bob, oversized sunglasses indoors, and a voice that could peel paint off drywall. She was the HOA president, self-declared protector of neighborhood values, which really meant she liked bossing people around and citing made-up bylaws. I stood there in my kitchen holding that HOA envelope like I'd just been handed a parking ticket for a car I didn't own. Inside was a list of registered voting households for their upcoming budget vote. Right there, printed in bold, was my name, my address, and the signature? R. Cole, except I never signed a damn thing. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the HOA office, a converted garage at the end of the cul-de-sac. There she was, Glenda, in her natural habitat, sitting behind a folding table with a cheap laptop and a smug look on her face. "Glenda," I said, keeping my voice level. "Why is my name on your voting roster?" She looked up, clearly annoyed I was interrupting her coffee. "Oh, Randall, we went ahead and included your property in the HOA. It just made sense, proximity and all." "You can't just include me," I said. "I never signed anything." "This is fraud." Glenda's mouth twitched. "We had a unanimous board vote. We needed more properties to maintain community standards. It's already filed. You'll get your first dues invoice next month." I stared at her. "You forged my signature. We used a proxy form." She waved her hand like it was no big deal. "Sometimes people forget they signed. Happens all the time." "No, not this time," I said, "because I've got cameras and records and I never signed a thing." That wiped the smug off her face. I left without saying another word. Went straight home, pulled my home security footage from the last 6 months, and double-checked every scrap of mail. Nothing from the HOA, no forms, no proxies. I even pulled the county zoning map. My property was still officially outside the HOA lines. By the weekend, I had everything. Time-stamped security footage, scanned zoning documents, and a copy of the forged proxy form from the HOA's public folder online. And the kicker: Glenda hadn't just signed me up, she'd added 3 other non-HOA addresses to boost their vote count. I filed a fraud report with the county clerk's office Monday morning, and then I waited. By Tuesday, a county investigator named Layla Tran showed up at my door. She was sharp mid-30s, clean blazer, clipboard in hand, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. After reviewing my packet of evidence and asking a few precise questions, she nodded once and said she'd be escalating it to the district attorney's office. That was the last thing I expected to hear before breakfast. "Forgery tied to property governance isn't just paperwork fraud," she said. "It can impact taxes, insurance liens. That's a felony." She didn't need to convince me. I invited her in, showed her the footage from my porch cam and phone logs. She took notes without saying much, but her expression tightened when I showed her the fake proxy form Glenda had uploaded to the public minutes folder. "I recognize the notary stamp," she said, tapping the corner of the document. "That's her cousin. His commission expired 2 years ago." There it was, a deeper crack. That evening, I drove to the community center where the HOA was holding their budget vote, the one I'd supposedly been included in. The parking lot was packed, mostly with residents who had no idea what was coming. I didn't go in right away. I waited until the meeting was halfway through, and people had sunk into the usual boredom of budget lines and landscaping proposals. Then I walked straight to the podium. Glenda blinked rapidly when she saw me. "This is a closed—" "No, it's not," I said, raising a manila folder. "Because you made it public when you forged documents to include properties outside your jurisdiction." That got the room quiet. Several people leaned forward. This isn't the place for personal grievances," Glenda said, her hand twitching toward the mic. I held up a printed screenshot. You uploaded this proxy form to your own HOA record system. My name is on it. That's not my signature. A murmur spread through the room. And this stamp here, I pointed to the bottom, belongs to your cousin, Roger. His notary license was revoked in June of last year, meaning this document is not only fake, it's illegal. Glenda tried to cut the mic, but one of the board members, a jittery guy named Barry, stood up and said, "Wait. Is this true?" "I filed a fraud report with the county," I continued. "An investigator confirmed the notary stamp is invalid. That makes every proxy vote Glenda submitted with that notary seal null and void." Someone in the back gasped. Another person said, "My husband's proxy was notarized by Roger last month." That cracked the room in half. Within 5 minutes, phones were out, neighbors whispering, HOA members flipping through papers. Glenda stood frozen, gripping the edge of the podium. Her carefully rehearsed grip on the room was gone. Someone yelled, "How many fake votes are we talking about?" I didn't need to answer. Barry turned to Glenda. "We need an emergency audit right now." She tried to protest, but it was too late. The room had turned. I left before the shouting really started. By Friday, the district attorney's office contacted several homeowners to verify their signatures on past votes. Turns out, at least 9 other properties had proxy forms notarized by the same expired commission. 3 of them didn't even live in the state anymore. It wasn't just me. Glenda had been fabricating majority votes for over a year to push through budget increases, committee appointments, and rule expansions. The county issued a formal cease and desist letter to the Willow Ridge HOA. Glenda's cousin Roger was arrested for notary fraud and obstruction. He panicked during questioning and admitted she asked him to help with a few documents to secure quorum. She gave him gift cards in return. By the following week, Glenda was under formal investigation. Her house went dark, mailbox overflowing. She didn't come to the next HOA meeting. Her seat sat empty, but things didn't stop there. At the next emergency session, the board had to address the elephant in the room. All votes involving forged proxies were invalid. That meant every rule change made in the past year had to be rolled back, including the one that gave Glenda's family exclusive rights to the community parks event calendar, a little-known perk she'd slipped in last spring. Turns out her daughter, Crystal, had been using the park to run a for-profit dog training class every Saturday, collecting cash and telling residents they needed HOA approval to use the space. That approval came directly from her mother. With the invalid votes nullified, Crystal lost her permit. Her husband, Trent, had been on the board's landscaping committee, and his business had secured the exclusive groundskeeping contract without competitive bidding. That contract was frozen pending review. The HOA bylaws were clear. Any board member or family member found guilty of unethical behavior could lose voting privileges for 5 years. Every adult in Glenda's household had been on at least one committee or vote. They were all stripped of voting rights, effective immediately. The next week, lawn signs popped up around the neighborhood. Clean slate for Willow Ridge. Residents started attending meetings in record numbers. A new interim board was formed, and for the first time in years, people who'd never spoken at meetings were stepping up with ideas. I never intended to get involved. I just didn't want to be dragged into something I never agreed to. But when people found out I was the one who reported it, they started stopping by. Some dropped off thank you notes. Others offered to bring over coffee. One guy offered to mow my lawn for a month. I told them I didn't do it for thanks, but I did accept the coffee. The last time I saw Glenda, she was loading boxes into a rental van just after sunrise. Her lawn was overgrown, garden beds half dead. No one waved, no one helped. She didn't look up. She was alone. Just like she'd tried to make everyone else feel when she was in charge. Funny how quickly power disappears when it's built on fake signatures and rigged votes. The following month brought a strange calm to Willow Ridge, the kind that made people lean in and listen instead of walking with their heads down. You could feel the shift. Lawn chairs started popping up in front yards again. Kids rode scooters down sidewalks without parents nervously watching for rule enforcers. And for once, people were talking to neighbors they'd never acknowledged before. I figured it would end there. Glenda was gone, her hold broken, and the board was being rebuilt from scratch. But then the audit results came back quietly, nearly overlooked, tucked into the back of the county's Community Oversight Bulletin. I was at the post office when I ran into Layla Tran again. She was off duty, dressed in jeans and a faded navy hoodie, but her eyes still carried that same laser focus. "You might want to check the assessor's report," she said, not bothering with a hello. "Willow Ridge's Community Improvement Fund, there's a discrepancy." I raised an eyebrow. "How big?" She pulled her phone from her pocket and showed me a screenshot. "Over 70,000, missing, misfiled as maintenance costs, no receipts, no contractor records." I took a slow breath. "So not just forged votes, embezzlement. And probably tax fraud," she added. "If they filed deductions off fake expenses, it's federal." It was no longer just about Glenda's power trip. Now it was a financial crime scene. That same afternoon, I met with two of the newly elected board members, Maya Vega, a nurse who lived near the park, and Darren Holt, a retired welder with a penchant for reading municipal codes for fun. They'd both been skeptical when they first ran, but they were learning fast. Maya flipped through a binder filled with bank statements. "We just started digging into the HOA account. Half the checks were made out to WR Community Services. That's not a registered vendor." Darren tapped the table. I looked up the routing number. "It's tied to a business account opened under Glenda's name, not the HOA's." I leaned forward. "You're saying she created a shell company and paid herself?" "She even invoiced the HOA for security patrols that never happened," Maya said. "Claimed she hired a private firm to enforce curfew compliance. No one ever saw a patrol car." The evidence was stacking fast. Misappropriated funds, fraudulent billing, forged authorizations. And the worst part, some of the payments had been recurring for over a year. Glenda hadn't just bent the rules, she'd built a whole side hustle off the HOA's back. The board voted unanimously to turn over all financial records to the county's Financial Crimes Division. Within days, subpoenas were issued. Glenda's old laptop, which had been left behind in the HOA office, was recovered and handed over to investigators. The hard drive revealed email threads with her cousin Roger, Crystal, and two former board members who'd quietly resigned just before the fraud was exposed. One email thread stood out. It was dated 8 months earlier, titled Reallocation Plan. The messages discussed moving funds from the emergency drainage project into consulting fees for Glenda's company fees that were never disclosed to residents. Glenda had used those funds to pay off the lease on a new SUV. Crystal had been reimbursed for marketing materials, which turned out to be a photo shoot for her dog training business. And Trent. He'd billed the HOA for tree hazard mitigation, a fancy way of saying he'd cut down a neighbor's tree because it was blocking their view. The county filed charges against all three: fraud, misuse of fiduciary responsibilities, and wire transfer crimes. Glenda was arrested at a boutique pet spa 3 towns over. Crystal turned herself in after trying and failing to scrub her name off the HOA vendor list. Trent was picked up outside his landscaping warehouse. Court proceedings began within 3 weeks. The courtroom was packed residents, reporters, and a few former board members who kept their heads low. Glenda sat at the defense table in a muted gray suit, looking thinner and older than I remembered. She didn't glance toward the gallery once. The prosecution laid out a meticulous case. They introduced internal HOA emails, check registers, fake receipts, and even a voice memo Glenda had accidentally recorded on her phone during a conversation with Roger, an unguarded moment where she joked about patting the books to keep the dogs off my lawn. The judge wasn't amused. When Maya testified, she brought a copy of the bylaws with her. She pointed to the section that required all expenditures over $5,000 to be approved by a 2/3 vote, a vote that, thanks to the fake proxies, never legitimately happened. Darren took the stand next and walked the court through the city code violations tied to the missing funds. He didn't raise his voice once, but every word landed like a hammer. By the third day, Glenda's defense tried to shift blame to the previous administration, to unclear protocols, even to overzealous volunteers. But the paper trail shredded every excuse. In the end, the guilty pleas came fast. Glenda accepted a plea deal: 5 years probation, restitution of $81,000, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. Crystal and Trent received probation and were ordered to repay all the funds tied to their businesses. The HOA was left with an account balance just shy of $600, but what it gained was far more valuable: trust. The new board passed a set of reforms: mandatory third-party audits, open ledger access for all homeowners, and a rotating oversight committee that couldn't include any board members or their relatives. No more backroom deals, no more unchecked power. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the cicadas started humming, I stood at the edge of my driveway sipping coffee and watching the neighborhood shift into something better. Maya walked by with her dog, gave a nod, and said, "You know, we should have listened sooner." I shrugged. You did when it mattered. A few days later, an older couple from 2 streets over approached me while I was checking my mailbox. They handed me a folded piece of paper. "We're forming a neighborhood council," the man said. "No power, no votes, just a way to keep everyone connected. We'd like you to be part of it." I looked down at the paper. It wasn't fancy, just a list of names, some handwritten notes, and a small map of the neighborhood, no signatures, just people choosing to be involved. I nodded. Count me in. Because justice wasn't just about catching Glenda. It was about making sure no one like her ever got that far again. The first sign that things hadn't finished unraveling came in the form of a letter not from the HOA, but from the city's Office of Infrastructure Oversight. It arrived in a plain envelope, the kind you'd expect a utility bill in, but the return address made me open it faster than I'd intended. Inside was a formal notification. Willow Ridge had submitted permits for road resurfacing and sidewalk reconstruction over the past year. The funding request had been flagged because the HOA claimed matching funds from the city for repairs on streets they didn't legally own. My street was on that list. I took the letter straight to Darren, who had been keeping track of city filings since the audit. He read it twice, then pulled out a thick binder from his kitchen cabinet that he'd labeled Post-Glenda Phase. "They applied for state-matched infrastructure grants," he said, flipping pages. "Those are only available to public agencies or certified associations with jurisdiction over the affected property. You're not in their district. Never were." I looked at the city's response again. They claimed my road needed repaving, even cited photos. But this was resurfaced 3 years ago. Darren tapped a document with narrowed eyes. They must have used altered images or claimed damages that didn't exist. I called Layla Tran again. This time, she didn't wait to be formal. "We've already opened a case," she said. "You're not the only homeowner outside the boundary whose street was listed." One of the grant reviewers flagged the discrepancy when they noticed duplicate photos submitted from 2 different neighborhoods. "How much did they get approved for?" "Just under $48,000, she replied. The first disbursement was released 6 months ago. That meant Glenda and her board had received public money based on falsified boundaries and fake infrastructure reports after they'd already been under investigation. Layla asked me to attend a closed-door hearing as a civilian witness. It was scheduled at the county administration building, in a room that looked more like a library than a courtroom. Long oak table, glass water pitchers, and a panel of city officials who looked more exhausted than angry. I wasn't the only one there. A man named Curtis Harper, who lived on a street 2 blocks south. brought in drone footage showing his road had never been touched by any repair crews. Another resident had time-stamped footage showing the supposed before and after photos used in the grant request were taken on different cul-de-sacs altogether. The panel listened in silence. When they asked questions, they were surgical. "Who signed off on the application?" one of them asked. Darren stepped forward. The HOA president and treasurer, Glenda Barkley, and a man named Everett Klein. Everett hadn't been involved in the previous fraud case. He'd kept a lower profile, always sitting at the far end of the table during meetings, rarely speaking. But it turned out he was the one who'd submitted the grant documents using a city portal account registered under Willow Ridge's name. That made it federal grant fraud. Within a week, federal investigators from the Office of Inspector General contacted the city. Subpoenas were issued for every digital file, scan document, and payment receipt tied to the resurfacing grant. The grant had been part of a pilot program funded through a federal infrastructure initiative, which meant this wasn't just paperwork trouble anymore, it was criminal theft of federal funds. Everett was arrested at his accounting office during lunch. They carried out his desktop and a filing cabinet. Glenda, already under probation, was taken in again for questioning. This time, the charges were more serious: wire fraud, submission of false claims, misrepresentation of jurisdictional authority to obtain government grants at the arraignment, the U.S. Attorney's Office presented a detailed timeline. Glenda and Everett had used satellite images from a neighboring subdivision and altered timestamps to fabricate repair needs. Their contractor invoices were from a company registered to Everett's cousin in Nevada, a company that had never done work in state. The most damning piece of evidence came from Everett's own laptop, a spreadsheet labeled Funding Targets Q1, Q4, with a column titled Plausible Street Names. Every listed address was outside Willow Ridge's jurisdiction. The plea deals were off the table. Glenda's attorney argued diminished responsibility due to stress and lack of formal training. The judge wasn't moved. The federal court scheduled a full trial. During testimony, a forensic accountant detailed how the funds had been laundered through small payments to shell vendors, then siphoned into personal accounts. Everett tried to claim he'd been manipulated, but the email records showed otherwise. He'd proposed the grant scheme. Glenda had simply approved it. The jury was out for less than 2 hours before returning a unanimous verdict. Both were convicted. Glenda was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, plus restitution exceeding $75,000. Everett received 5 years and was banned from holding a fiduciary role in any organization for life. Back in Willow Ridge, the fallout was immediate. The city revoked the association's access to all public funding programs. Insurance providers dropped their liability coverage pending reevaluation. The HOA's charter was placed under administrative review, but something happened that surprised even me. Residents submitted a petition signed by 2/3 of the neighborhood to dissolve the Willow Ridge HOA entirely. They wanted a clean break. No board, no dues. Just a voluntary neighborhood association with no enforcement power. The vote passed. Within 30 days, the HOA was officially dissolved. The remaining funds, just under $900, were donated to a local after-school program. The old HOA office was emptied, its files boxed and stored at the city archive. The sign out front was taken down by a man on a ladder who whistled the whole time. On a Saturday morning, the neighborhood held what they called the Freedom Picnic. Potluck tables lined the park. Kids ran barefoot through chalk obstacle courses. Someone set up a dunk tank, and Darren, still wearing his municipal code hat, took the first plunge. Maya found me near the lemonade table and handed me a folded sheet of paper. "It's from the council," she said. "We're planning to support other neighborhoods dealing with the same kind of mess. Legal templates, oversight guides, we want you to help." I glanced at the paper. At the top, Coalition for Fair Neighborhoods, I nodded. Let's make sure no one else ends up with another Glenda. A few weeks later, I walked past the old HOA office. The windows were dark, the door was locked. A notice from the city was taped to the glass. No longer in use, property under review. I kept walking. There was no celebration for Glenda's sentencing. No headlines, just a quiet, firm end to something that had gone on too long, and in its place, something better had finally begun.